So in an egalitarian environment, being not attached to things is very helpful. It's much easier to get along and fit into that kind of environment. But it turns out for many people that were there and many people that came to visit, not being attached to things is easy to do in theory, really hard to do in reality. For someone like me who likes solving problems and seeing opportunities for improvement, Eastwind seemed like a target-rich environment. Outside of intentional community, you can be very picky about your friends or who you associate with or not associate with, or not associate with anyone at all. For instance, I was pretty much a loner before I lived at Eastwind. And Eastwind, after living so closely with so many people, I found actually I liked that. And I was sort of the opposite of that afterwards. My name is Rick Hauer, and I live in Reston, Virginia now. And I was at Eastwind for a couple of years back in the mid 80s. I was born in the Bronx in New York City, but I think someone made a mistake when I was born. Whoever's in charge sent me down in the Bronx, but actually I think I was supposed to be sent down to maybe Austin, Texas or something like that, because as it turns out, I've never really been comfortable in big cities like New York City. I'm very comfortable in Texas honky tonk with country western music. So I never felt like I belonged in New York City. So I think it was a mistake whoever sent me down there. That's Denise in the background there, my significant other. And so when I was just a few months old, we moved out of New York City. My parents were both city people, grew up there. Eventually ended up in a small town out in eastern Long Island that had, I think, one traffic light at the time. Didn't even have a high school. And during my time there, they decided the town was growing and they built a high school for us. Well, it never actually got finished on time, so I never actually had a high school to go to. I went to high school in temporary buildings. We didn't have much in the way of sports teams, and basically graduated from a bunch of temporary buildings at an old junior high school. I didn't really like high school that much, didn't even go to my high school graduation, but had some interesting experiences along the way. And I'd say I was the usual clueless suburban kid growing up, not having any idea of what the heck was going on in the world or about myself or anything else. A good example is in eighth grade, a friend of mine said, "Hey, how'd you like to go to a rock and roll concert?" So I said, "Sure." And it turned out it was a Jimi Hendrix concert at the local university. To show you how clueless we were, we didn't know anything. We'd never been to a rock and roll concert, didn't know much about it, hadn't even been to the nearby university much. So we got dressed what we thought was proper for a concert, jacket and tie. Talk about clueless. But the college folks, when we're sitting in the audience, they were very cool about it. And we had no idea what it was, but they passed us joints, things like that. And Jimi Hendrix did his usual thing, playing the guitar behind his back and screaming, throwing his guitar and smashing it. So we thought, oh, rock and roll concerts, these are kind of different. That was a good example of how clueless we were, going to a Jimi Hendrix concert in a jacket and tie. See, at my senior year in high school, after my senior year, one of my friends said, "Hey, would you like to make some money doing something different this summer?" So we bought ourselves a clam boat, bought ourselves a motor, fixed up the boat, and went out to the Great South Bay of Long Island every day digging clams. Turns out about 1/3 of the clams in America come from this one particular bay on the south shore of Long Island. So that was a real eye-opener for a clueless kid, suburban kid. be out there every day in the hot sun, 12 hours a day, digging clams in 10 to 15 feet deep water with these long telescoping aluminum rakes that would dig the bottom of the bay to get the clams. We sold them in bushel bags to a wholesale buyer. So that was an interesting experience.
Did you know someone who was into that, or you just...
One of the teachers at the high school was into that.
Okay.
So I started doing some adventurous things when I was in high school, even though I was a clueless kid who hadn't seen much of anything of the world outside of my little tiny town. I also started hitchhiking then. I was not and still am not a morning person, so I missed the school bus a lot. School was about 5 miles away, so I'd be late, grab something to eat, run through the woods to the nearby highway that could get me to the school and stick out my thumb. And I almost always made it to school in time for homeroom. I was very rarely late. But I got used to hitchhiking then. And I ended up hitchhiking a lot in college and after college. I ended up hitchhiking around the world, in Europe, Australia, Fiji, other places, around the US, total of about 50,000 miles. So I got started with that in high school by not being a morning person.
Wow. And so were your parents gave you a lot of freedom, would you say?
Not really, but they didn't always know what was going on. And they had already left for work by the time I went off to school.
Oh, okay. So they didn't necessarily know about all the hitchhiking.
No, I made it to school on time, so they
Right.
didn't really have to know that. I don't remember now how much they knew. I guess they knew something about it.
And where did you attend college?
A state school in upstate New York, Albany. Since we didn't have a high school, my class in 10th grade was the oldest group in school. In 11th grade, we were still the oldest group. 12th grade, we were still the oldest group. There was no one ahead of us to tell us about how it worked, getting into college, what was involved. Guidance counselors didn't know anything. I was the oldest of my family. I had a brother and a sister. And so I had no idea what was going on. So I ended up getting into just the one school. And it turned out to be the perfect school for me in some ways, because I still did sports, but they didn't care about sports. They didn't take it seriously, and neither did I.
What did you like to play?
Well, I did several sports in high school and college. I did volleyball, I did wrestling, I did track and cross country and soccer. Mostly what I did was track. We only lost one track meet all through my time in 4 years of college. The one time we lost, you could not tell on the team bus going home that we had lost. We acted just the same because nobody took it that seriously. When I got to San Diego, living there, that was kind of a laid back place, especially back in the 70s before it grew a lot. And that fit me well. I didn't take jobs or careers that seriously. So I took a lot of time off to travel on the cheap, mostly by hitchhiking.
You said you were in construction or you were in property management of some kind right before you checked out Eastwind?
Well, I started out doing a couple of jobs related to my degree in science, but it wasn't a good fit, really. So I stopped that after a couple of years and started doing construction, working with a friend of mine on some rental properties he had, and doing finding other jobs. And eventually that's just what I did for quite a while. Working for myself, had a little business. I'd have other people work for me here and there. I worked for property management companies doing small remodeling jobs, things like that. I like being self-employed, even though I didn't make a lot of money.
And you told me that your friend showed you an ad for Eastwind that was in Mother Earth News.
Mhm.
What do you remember about that ad, and what was the decision-making process to go check it out?
Well, I don't remember if it was an ad or an article, but there was something in Mother Earth News. And I had this idea in the back of my mind for quite a while that I wouldn't mind trying to live in some rural area with a slower pace of life. Because I had always lived in suburban or city areas like Albany. Uh, I lived in suburban San Diego, suburban New York City. Um, so I decided maybe I should try something different. But I didn't know of an easy way to do that since I didn't know anybody that lived in some rural area, and I didn't want to do it by myself. So when a friend of mine showed me that article or the ad, I decided, hey, that would be a good chance to do that. At the time, I had sort of wound down my construction work, getting a little tired of it because I had to do a lot of driving around. I was getting cut up and injured all the time. And just decided maybe it was time to try something different. I had bought a house, but then I had fixed it up to some extent and sold it and I was just sharing an apartment with someone else and working part-time when a friend showed me that ad. So I decided, well, this was a good time to try it. I think I flew out to Springfield and did the visitor period,
And you were 30 at that time, is that correct?
something like that.
Okay.
So after that, went with a few of the other visitors. We had a good group of visitors at the time, and several of us got together, rented a car, and drove out to Twin Oaks to visit there and check it out there.
After having met at Eastwind.
Yeah,
That's awesome. All right.
yeah, it was a fun group. We both got accepted at both places. I decided I liked East Wind and moved to East Wind, and there I was.
What were your first impressions when you visited there? What really made you think I want to come and live here?
Well, I liked it being, like I said, being rural out in the boonies. I mean, 3 miles down the end of a dirt road on the Ozarks, that was getting pretty rural. I liked the non-authoritarian way things were at East Wind. Some people might say the chaotic way things were at East Wind. I felt that Twin Oaks was a little more authoritarian. It was a little harder at the time at Twin Oaks to get into doing some kind of work you liked. Whereas at East Wind, there was lots of opportunities because there wasn't enough people in pretty much anything. The population was reasonably high, I think, when I went to visit, but it was dropping. There was plenty of problems to deal with at Eastwind. It seemed to me at the time that Eastwind was sort of more chaotic and a little more loosey-goosey there, and things weren't as well organized and well run as Twin Oaks. Twin Oaks seemed like they had it together more and had all these talented people there. Eastwind had some talented people too, but it seems like Twin Oaks really just had it more together, was my impression. So for someone like me who likes solving problems and seeing opportunities for improvement, Eastwind seemed like a target-rich environment. That's the way to put it. That's not saying something negative. It was just the way it was there. Intentional communities are difficult. I mean, financially and socially and organizationally, they're just hard to do. An intentional community that's a target-rich environment is not unusual from what I learned over time. Okay, one of my early impressions also was just the environment of the Ozarks. Coming from East Wind, where I had my own little construction business, from San Diego, where time is money. Got to drive around in traffic, get supplies, equipment, do bids, talk to people, work on jobs, get help, plan things out. And so it's go, go, go. Time is money. Go to the hardware store, the lumberyard, pick up materials, bring up my list, go through my list, and need this and this and this, bing, bing, bing. get what I needed, drive off, deal with traffic, get the work done. So I get to Eastwind, I'm in the rural Ozarks, helping out with some construction and repair projects at Eastwind. Go into, I don't remember if it was Gainesville or West Plains, to the lumberyard slash hardware store. And I go in with my list and I walk into the store. I'm walking in fast, still in San Diego mode. Okay, at the hardware store, and go up to the counter. Here's my list. Bing, bing, bing. I need this, this, and this, this, and this. Do you have this in stock? Can I get it now? And the guys behind the counter just looked at me. What planet is this guy from? and they clued me in that I wasn't in the city anymore. And I had to learn to slow down and chill out. That was turned out to be one of the big advantages and things I learned from being there at Eastwind out in the Ozarks, basically to slow down. I didn't realize how frenetic my life had become before that. It wasn't especially frenetic compared to maybe living in Manhattan or something like that. So it was a good lesson to learn how to slow down, and that I could slow down being at Eastwind. So that was an important first impression and an important part of being there. Another first impression, and this relates to the kitchen manager stuff a little bit, maybe as a good segue, was walking in early on in my time at Eastwind, early in the time there, to walk in one night to Rock Bottom and the kitchen area and seeing a couple of people there with blowtorches in dark corners of the kitchen trying to incinerate cockroaches. I did a fair bit of work as kitchen manager trying to deal with the flies and the cockroaches and getting things cleaner and more organized in the kitchen.
Yeah,
so we can segue into the kitchen manager stuff now.
Yeah, so you described that as the best job you ever had, the role of kitchen manager. Were you one of many managers? And maybe just walk us through your day-to-day and how the food services were back then.
There was a lot of turnover at the time. That was, maybe there always has been, I'm not sure how things have gone, but my time there was a lot of turnover, especially during my initial time there. So jobs were often opening up and roles were often opening up in the community. I didn't start out obviously in any manager role. I started out doing a variety of things, a lot of construction and repair work, working in hammocks, which was the big business at the time, and cooking in the kitchen. I did a variety of other things too, but those were some of my main jobs starting out. And I found I liked working in the kitchen and cooking. At first, of course, I was just helping out and learning the ropes, cooking with other folks. There was usually 2 people at a time doing the meals. At the time, we had prepared lunches and dinners, and everybody did their own thing for breakfast. You could do some of your own food cook your own food if you wanted, but most people didn't. At the time, the monthly allowance was $10 a month, so you didn't get a chance to buy a lot of your own food. I think it's now $150 a month or something.
Right.
So when I first heard about the $150 a month, I said, "Oh my God, those folks are rich." I made some of my own meals, but mostly I ate the meals that were available, which were mostly fairly decent, but varied. Some of the cooks were pretty good, some not so good. Ongoing controversy. I don't know if that's still the case. Veggies and meaties. We always had veggie options available at meals. Some meals, I think 3 times a week, were all veggie. I didn't know anything about vegetarian food or cooking when I started, but I learned. I thought the food options were pretty good. The meals were fairly good. Always seemed to be enough. You could go get more out of the refrigerators or whatever supplies if you wanted it. But there were certain things you couldn't take. We eventually tried having cooks-only refrigerators so that the cooks would have some reliable supplies of food to use.
Was there the large
Helped.
walk-in unit outside?
There was a walk-in unit, but it wasn't refrigerated. It was just a storage unit.
Okay.
Everything in the kitchen was pretty much old and decrepit and tough to keep in repair. We even had an equipment revolt at one time where just a whole bunch of equipment just gave up the ghost all at the same time. And that included things in the kitchen. But we had stuff that worked most of the time. And it was good for cooking for, the population was about 60 at the time. And it slowly dropped, I think, to about 45 or so. So we had issues in having enough cooks, enough people working in the kitchen, enough people doing anything. I liked working in the kitchen because it was a way of showing, in my view, that you cared about the community by trying to put out good food. There was always turbulence in the community. It's when I try to explain to people that were never there, what it was like, one of the words I use, it's intense, because you're crammed in together with 50, 60, 70 other people 24/7. It can get intense. And human nature being what it is, I think that you just have controversies and arguments, difficulties all the time. So if I could put out good food for people and make their part of their day, at least with a good meal, I think that could really alleviate a lot of the intensity and the whatever negativity was going on there. So I tried hard to do that. I liked the creativity that was involved in creating meals that were different or nutritious and tasty. That was always a challenge, of course. I liked working with the other folks to create a meal most of the time. Sometimes it got difficult, as you know, and as any experienced intentional community people watching this know, there's always controversies and people you get along with and people you don't, but you got to work with them anyway. But most of the time I got along well with the people I was cooking with. And if you put out a good meal and you had a good time cooking, that was really a high. That was really enjoyable.
Would you get a lot of feedback during meals or after meals from people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was one of the pluses, I think. And if you made a bunch of good hammocks or something, or you did a good job cleaning something up or did the laundry real well, you didn't get a lot of, who knew? You didn't get a lot of feedback necessarily. But if you put out a good meal, you get very quick feedback. And that was nice. If you put out a crappy meal, you got quick feedback too. And eventually, when I became the kitchen manager, I got the feedback not just about my meals, but about other folks' meals. And usually, if it was about other people's meals, the feedback was pretty much negative. The positive feedback I didn't get as the kitchen manager.
You said that you, and I have a picture that you sent me here that I'll put up, but you sent off a 2-week typical menu of meals to a Missouri state government nutritionist. So tell us a little bit about that.
I explained our situation when I got a hold of somebody, and I was pretty sure they were going to blow us off. Thinking, hippie, sounds like a hippie commune out in the boonies. I'm not going to talk to these people, but they were very, very nice about it. And they asked me to send them a typical 2-week list of meals. So I did that. And they sent back a reply saying that basically our diet looked pretty good. I included all the veggie as well as the meaty meals and everything else. They said basically we were doing pretty good. The only thing she said to pay more attention to was dairy with fats and other foods with fats for the young kids. They probably needed more of that in their diets. Other than that, she said our nutrition was pretty good. And I slept a lot better after that because I was kind of concerned about it. Plus I had some ammunition to argue with the raw wheatgrass folks. Well, there was arguments back and forth about if the meals were proper nutrition. There was one of the cooks there who I was good friends with, but we got into a lot of arguments about what was a proper diet. She wanted basically vegetarian raw wheatgrass for every dinner. And most people and me didn't think that was really going to work in the community for meals. She didn't want any sugar in the meals. I was okay with lots of good, tasty desserts, and most people were okay with it. She had some good ideas, but I could have done a better job listening to her. But I had to listen to lots of people and their ideas about food. For folks that haven't, again, for folks who are listening to this that haven't lived in an intentional community, food is a big part of your life there. That's where you get together for meals for most folks. If you have a good meal, it can really make your day. You can't just go to some restaurant or someplace else that you feel like going. You're stuck there with the food available there. So there was lots of opinions and arguments about what was proper meals. Vegetarians, of course, had their opinions. There was various flavors of vegetarian, vegan, whatever. The meaties, some people insisted we got to have lots of bacon available. Just got to have bacon. That was a big deal. I was shocked by that. We got to have bacon. I was surprised at what a big deal bacon was. I did not like ordering bacon. It had very little nutrition. It was very expensive. But as kitchen manager, you have to sort of mix and match and compromise and keep a reasonable number of people happy. So I ordered bacon, but it wasn't enough for some folks.
Yeah, Jim Adams told me that he would prepare 5 pounds of bacon for the Sunday brunch, or Sunday morning meal.
Okay, I can talk. Jim, if you listen to this, I'm going to talk about some of this controversy as it relates to you, Jim. Jim and I were good buddies. We did a lot together. We worked on maintenance together. I think it was called Bug Branch then.
Yes, yeah.
And he was a pretty good cook. He worked as a cook. He did Sunday made-to-order breakfast sometimes, and I did a lot of that too. Sunday made-to-order breakfast, when Jim was doing it, he wanted a lot of cheese and a lot of bacon available. Well, we just had limited amounts of that, and I did not like ordering extra bacon. So we had arguments about that pretty much every Saturday if he was going to do the Sunday breakfast. So eventually we'd argue back and forth, and I'd say, what do you want to have in good supply, cheese or bacon? So instead of making it an argument about to have cheese and bacon, I'd make it an either or argument. And so we'd pick cheese or bacon, pick one, and then I'd make that available. That was a typical kind of kitchen manager kind of argument. That was very good training for a young guy to learn how to deal with strong opinions and lots of people and still get the job done, manage all these differing opinions and needs and wants. And so that was a really good learning experience. And I actually ended up enjoying it, figuring out how to have these difficult discussions with people when they get really worked up about their food. And then figuring out how to deal with the cooks wanting to serve raw wheatgrass, vegan-only meals all the time, and then deal with the people who were complaining about all the meals that those cooks prepared. I think many people thought kitchen manager would be the most stressful job in the community. I didn't view it that way. I really enjoyed it. And to this day, it was still the best job I ever had.
What was the social scene like? What were parties like?
Well, I saw from your other interviews that apparently social life for many years at Eastwind revolved around drinking and drugging, but I'm not sure what the story was while I was there. I might have just been sort of clueless to it because I was never really into those things. I would just have an occasional beer, maybe. So I don't really know. Maybe I was just out of the loop, but I don't think I was that much out of the loop. When I first got there, there was somebody brewing their own beer, and I think selling it. And that ended up being one of the many unending controversies, never ending during my time there. As you know, and other folks who have lived there, there's just a never-ending supply of controversies and things to get worked up about while living there.
Were there monthly holiday parties and?
They were irregular. They weren't monthly,
Okay.
but we had them. We had performance nights where people would do music or read poetry, things like that. Since the hammock shop was the big business at the time, Nut Butters was growing, but in the hammock shop, there'd be sort of parties in the hammock shop, a hammock weaving party where entertainment would go on while people were making hammocks. A lot of the social life revolved around just getting together and talking. Some people would drink or smoke while just yakking away. But a lot of time it was just people getting together and talking. There was canoeing, hiking, reading up in the library, which wasn't necessarily social, but other people were always up there to talk to. Oh, there was poker games, which I went to, but I stopped going to because people were betting a lot of money with a community allowance of $10 a month. I thought, this is too cutthroat for me. So I stopped going. Big parts of social life is, of course, relationships. And I don't know if you want to include that, but of course, that's a hugely complicated thing at an intentional community, because when you're outside of a community, just living on your own, you can do a wide variety of things to find a relationship. When you're in the community, it's just the folks there. And when you're outside, if you're having troubles in a relationship, if you're not living with a person, you can go home or break up or whatever. You might not have to ever see them again. You're in the community, you're there, you want to break up with somebody, you're going to see them at breakfast the next morning, whether you like it or not. You're going to see them 24/7. I suppose you can avoid them, but it's real hard. You might see them with their new relationship. If you're having difficulties, you're going to see them all the time. You can't get away. You got to hopefully learn to deal with it. And that's one of the advantages, of course, being in the community. You can be forced, maybe against your wishes, to learn how to be a better person and deal with difficulties and controversies and difficult things, and learn to cooperate, work through issues. And that's, I think, a valuable learning experience for a lot of the people that come through there. And I think you've mentioned that, and some of the interviewees that you put up on YouTube also mentioned that. So lots of opportunities to learn there as a part of your social life. So if you consider learning to be better at relationships of all kinds, as well as learning to be a better human being by being cooperative and more maybe thoughtful and caring, if that's what you're trying to do in the community, that's a real good opportunity when you live there to do that.
I wanted to look at this community decision-making chart and maybe just describe, for us who have no idea how it was back then, how you kind of remember how things went in terms of decision-making process.
Sure. So as far as the planning went, there's the higher level decisions with the planning board, and then there's the managers managing day-to-day things in the various aspects of the community, the kitchen, Nut Butters, the cows, when we had them, and all the different branches you see there.
I see you right there for kitchen under services.
Right.
And so there was a services committee that was made up of the managers of these various branches here?
Not that I remember. I think that was just a bucket for all those managerships. There were community meetings, of course, where any major decisions has to be made by community vote. And of course, the managers couldn't just, in an intentional community, can't just tell people what to do. You have to hopefully be good at being a I guess what they call a servant leader these days type of manager, where you're one of the team that hopefully can help motivate or train or encourage people to join your team or do a good job. And of course, the type of people that come to intentional community aren't always people that are necessarily very focused on those kinds of things. Otherwise, they wouldn't really be leaving the regular world and coming to an intentional community. So being a non-authoritarian servant leader kind of manager, which wasn't in my vocabulary then, but it was something I realized later I was learning to do or trying to learn. I wasn't a planner or involved with it. I didn't even know too much about it at first. But once I was there for a while and became kitchen manager, of course, I got involved, had to get involved to some extent in the process, or at least know what was going on. And I will mention that when I read back through my journal, I realized at the time, somewhere midway through my time there, the community held a vote to change from a planning board, which consisted of 3 people, to a basically single person overseer. I forget what the term was, and I don't remember what came of that. But the vote happened at the time, and a majority vote did go at a big community meeting to change the planning. The single overseer or the planning board mostly dealt with sort of longer term planning and overall budget and commitments, like how many hammocks to make for the upcoming year, for instance, what to plan for nut butters, what the budget needs might be upcoming, what the priorities would be for the community. To me, one of the issues was it ended up being mostly a financial economic board and not really a community board. And in fact, that came to be the case. And there ended up being some community meetings about that. But it was a big issue and was something that really grated on my nerves, in that the emphasis of community at a high level planning and thinking was more economic and financial, and the human side of things and the values, the community values side of things seemed to fall by the wayside too easily. As I mentioned, other people started recognizing that. I think towards the end of my time there were community meetings about it. I don't think I attended them, but it became more of a front and center issue. It's a tough challenge in a community like we had at Eastwind. Survival is, I guess, at the base of anything we did. We wanted to survive, have enough money coming in and deal with finances and commitments and budgets and being able to plan to some extent. However, the kind of community we were was relatively anti-authoritarian and at some decent levels values oriented, egalitarian, whatever. So how do you balance all those things out? It's really hard. And it's a miracle that both Eastwind and Twin Oaks have managed to survive for near half century or more, trying to balance out all those things.
You mentioned Will a little bit. I did want to just touch on him, whatever you have to say about it. You said that he was very involved in the finances and very involved in the nut butter starting up. Would he have left not too long after you had left? Is that?
I think he left a year or two after I did.
Okay.
His doctor had actually told him at one point, you have maybe another 2 years at the level of stress you have to continue going at the rate you're going. He cared. I liked Will a lot. I worked with him a lot on recruitment, Will really, he was a good, really good guy. He's a really good, decent human being, very talented and skilled. He really cared probably too much about the community and the success of the community. And that's what caused him so much stress. He really cared. He decided, consciously take on his health and stress problems to try to ensure that Nut Butters in the community was successful. He really sacrificed. Will, if you ever see this, I really admire how hard you worked at everything. And I guess you were successful because the community's still there and Nut Butters is still there doing well. Doing this. Am I doing okay? Thank you. She really helps give me perspective on a lot of things. Your question about recruitment. Recruitment was a big issue while I was there, and I wanted to try to help solve it as one of the many opportunities for improvement that I could sink my teeth into while I was there. And that was a tough nut to crack because the population had always gone up and down. And I think I shared with you a graph of the population variations over a period of about 10 years, up till the time I got there. I found all that data from the past statistics that people had collected that had worked on recruitment in the past. And we were on a downslope of population at the time I was there. In fact, that was very disconcerting in that some of the people I really liked left early on in my time there. I think they were just getting tired of some aspects of the community. And then over time, some people I really cared about left also. And I think that's an ongoing problem for anyone who lives in intentional community a long time. People you really care about leave, and it's not like they're maybe moving to the next town over and you can see them regularly still. They usually move far away and you can't see them anymore. And that can be a very hard thing. So I tried to work on recruitment because we were having such big resource issues, resource meaning people to do the work. Also, the population was dropping a lot during my time there, and Nut Butter's business was building up, which consumed a lot of resources in terms of people doing the work and keeping things repaired, working in the gardens, dealing with the cows, which we got rid of during my time there. That was a huge controversy, by the way. And of course, finances. So the population dropping was a big deal. And Will and other folks were getting very tired of the ups and downs of the population. So everyone was trying to figure out, and had for a long time been trying to figure out, how do we get more people to come and be interested here and to try it out and to stay here? And how do we get people to stay here over a long period of time? I wasn't actually one of the people that was necessarily thinking of being there long term, like my whole life. But I wanted to help with that issue. We came up with a couple of approaches. One was to come up with posters and start sending them out to universities. Another approach was advertising. Hey, those are two of the main things. One of my personal approaches was, as I wrote up in a kitchen manager guide that I wrote up before I left. A kitchen manager, one of the things you can do maybe to get people to stay is to create such great meals at Eastwind that they be so good that no one would want to leave because the food was just too good. I think that could have helped, but I'm not sure that would have been a major factor in keeping people there. But I tried.
I think that is, I actually have an interview with someone who lives there right now, and they very specifically mentioned the food. And that was a big factor for me as well while I lived there.
It turned out that sending out posters to universities was not a bad idea. We figured out what department, maybe the sociology department, would put up some posters talking about us. But it turned out our timing was rotten. We had no idea what was going on at the time. But it turned, at the same time we were trying to promote Eastwind through advertising or posters, whatever, there was a huge headline-making controversy going on up in Oregon at the time. We didn't get newspapers. You may recall what it was.
The
It's the
Rajneesh.
Rajneesh community, which turned out to be, it was grabbing headlines left and right for, I think, a year or so there. Basically, crazy commune in Oregon has thousands of hippies taking over towns. It turned out, as you know, some people went to jail. Anyway, so that made my recruiting job a lot tougher, I think.
I do want to talk about another very influential member who's perhaps a little more controversial, Yohanan. And, in the interview with Jim Adams, I'm pretty sure he said, Yohanan was single-handedly pushed more people out of the community. And you mentioned the fact that a lot of people left. And that's actually referred to as one of the exoduses by one of the current old members. So, what do you remember about that? And what was the shift in dynamics? You mentioned the change in governance in these meetings that were happening towards the end of your time there. But did you know Yohanan well? Did you work with him?
Yeah, I did. I cooked with him at times. I worked on a number of things with him at times. We talked a lot. I liked Yohanan personally because we had some personality aspects in common, which would probably make a lot of people cringe that knew Yohanan, because to a lot of people in the community, he was trouble. But I liked him. One of the things he I think was good at was recognizing hypocrisy, I think I was good at that too, but he was pretty upfront about it and calling it out verbally. I tried to keep that, internal, or at least learn how to deal with it diplomatically, because I knew I wasn't good at it, dealing with it. But Yohanan was pretty much front and center. If he thought you were being hypocritical, and there was a fair bit of hypocrisy going on at Eastwind, because as you know, and folks listening to this that live there know, there's a constant tension between the egalitarian nature, the sharing nature, and the reality of living there, and the reality of living in a nice rural community and having an assembly line factory on the land. Lots of different tensions that go on that have to be balanced out, which are not easy to balance out. And with all the young people there and people that come there naturally because they want to do something different, they're not comfortable at fitting in the regular life, that doesn't draw a lot of people that are good, laid back, easy to get along with, people that deal well with controversies. That's just not the type of people that are generally going to be drawn. There are plenty of those people that come to Eastwind and other intentional communities, but I don't think it's the majority. And that probably includes me. I was very difficult in a number of ways and was trying to become a better person while I was there. But Yohanan would call people out on these things. Plus, he had a child there. The lady he had a child with was an original member, and they split up after the kid was born. Anyway, he and his ex, who were both still there, did not get along at all and had big disagreements about child rearing. This is no secret about any of this stuff. This was all front and center about all this. His wife was Manette.
Okay.
Or his ex-wife or ex-partner. And Manette had remarried to a guy named Doug. So there was a lot of controversy around child raising. Naturally, there's going to be a lot of controversy over child raising for anybody. There was a child branch that did most of the child raising there. There was about 4 or 5 kids there at the time, young ones. Yohanan had this controversy going on, this difficulty in which it really grated on him, the child raising issues for his child. He had a lot of verbal skills in that he could be really sarcastic and cutting if he wanted to be, and he could be good at it if he wanted to be. He was also very smart, and he was I liked talking to him most of the time because he was very smart and a good conversationalist. Was a fairly deep thinker, and knew a lot, very educated in many ways. So I liked Johannes, but he was trouble. He was just trouble. And a lot of community trouble swirled around him. That had been the case before I got there. It was the case while I was there. And it was the case, obviously, after I left.
Yeah, how do you view egalitarianism and in the context of Eastwind?
My main reason for being there was to try rural living, getting away from city or urban or suburban life and trying something different. And I really liked the idea of the experiment. And for my visitor period, I thought there was some really cool people living there. There was also a lot of space cadets, difficult people, crazies, but a lot of really cool people, just fine human beings that were there also. And I liked being around those people. So the egalitarian part, I was fine with because I didn't feel real strongly about, but I was fine with it because I was never someone that got really attached to things. I was fine with sharing things. In fact, that's why I felt like it was a good way to live. I didn't want to live like way better than my next door neighbor or something like that. I liked it when things were on a relatively even level. I didn't want to feel better than someone or worse than someone. An egalitarian community seemed like something I would fit in well with. I didn't feel like I needed my single flush toilet. I was okay with a two-seater outhouse. I was okay with not having my own, 30 years old, not having my own room. I shared a room when I was there at first with somebody else. I eventually had my own room. I didn't feel like I had to have air conditioning in my room. Some people really wanted air conditioning in their room. So in an egalitarian environment, being not attached to things is very helpful. It's much easier to get along and fit into that kind of environment. But it turns out for many people that were there and many people that came to visit, not being attached to things is easy to do in theory, really hard to do in reality. Not being attached to having things done well or done on time or done right is very difficult to do, especially if it affects your life there. And I know you and the other interviewees talked about this. If you're in a community like Eastwind and you expect to get rewarded for doing a job well or for working harder, you're going to have a problem because that will not happen there. You will not get particularly rewarded for doing a job well, for working harder. There's a certain amount of work you're supposed to put in there. Beyond that, you're not required to, and you will not necessarily get pats on the back for it. And probably you shouldn't. There should not be social pressure to put in 100 hours a week. I was big on having things well done, mostly because I wanted to live in a reasonably decent, quote unquote, environment. I wanted to have the rock bottom roof not leaking on me while I was trying to cook. I wanted the shower house not to feel like the fungus and the mold off the walls was going to come and attack me. I wanted to feel like the poor folks working in nut butters were not going to have to be dealing with constant breakdowns. I wanted to feel like folks weren't able to skate by if they really wanted to while I was being honest and trying to do all my work and putting down the hours correctly. I wanted that not to be okay, but you have to learn to live with that and not be attached to those kinds of feelings. And that's just easy to do in theory and really hard to do in person. So if you're thinking about trying community and moving Eastwind, think about not being attached to things. Think about things being chaotic and being okay with it. Think about egalitarianism being a good theory, but not necessarily entirely 100% doable in practice, or maybe even 50%. Think about being able to compromise and not having things your way or doing things your way, which is a very good lesson in relationships of all kind, in the world of work and in the real world, and living in any kind of community, whether it be your family, your local community, your town, your country, or whatever. Learning how to figure out how to balance all that is a real valuable lesson. And Eastwind is a real good place to learn that. That answer the question about
that is excellent. I think that's wonderful advice. I just wanted to say, yeah, for myself, after the first couple of years I lived there, I had very few expectations, and I didn't have that attachment, and I did very well, I think, and I was very happy. And then after that first 2 years, I started thinking of it as my home, and I started becoming attached to, especially nut butters, because I was very involved in nut butters. And once I wanted I wanted to control, and I wanted things to go according to plan. And once I got into that kind of mindset, that's when it was kind of life got a lot harder for me. All right. Well, I really wanted to hear about this, the death of the Eastwind Dairy at the time when you were there.
So, that was a sad chapter.
So maybe, let's talk about, what happened there as you saw it, and, maybe we can get a little bit into community communication and how that goes. So,
well, let me give a little context first. As I mentioned, during my time there, the population was going down, people were leaving, especially some skilled people, and we use the term resources. The human resources available were declining. And so we didn't have enough people to do what was needed to get done. Some things needed to get done. Some things were nice to get done. Some things, well, it would have been good if we could get them done. The things that really needed to get done were things like getting the nut butter production out that was committed to for delivery, getting it done safely, getting the committed hammocks done. So we had to have the resources and balance that out while dealing with the priorities and dealing with other things to make life reasonably livable and not be just robotic workers there struggling and sweating just to get the basics done. So we had discussions and meetings about the labor shortage and what to do about it. And that meant cutting back on things. Some branches were mandated to cut back though, like bug branch repairs. Jim did not want to cut back the budget of the people, but basically was told, sorry, you have to. The cows took up a fair bit of labor. Ivy at the time was in charge of the cows, and she worked hard at it. We had a herd that wasn't real big. I don't remember how many, maybe 8 or something like that. A couple of calves. The barn was a disaster. I'm not sure if there's a new barn now. From pictures I saw, it looked like it must be new or fixed up. The fencing was a disaster. A lot of the labor for the cows was just rounding them up when they escaped, which happened regularly. I don't know if hopefully that still doesn't happen.
Much better fencing today, for sure.
Yeah. The milking was a lot of work dealing with newborn calves, needed labor for that. So the decision, not the decision to get rid of the cow herd, which means getting rid of dairy, it was requested by the planners. And that's a community decision, required an entire community meeting. Ivy was kind of left out of the discussions, in my view. The fact that she had put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the cows and the barn and the work and providing all that milk for the community and meat on occasion and dealing with the cows, she did by far most of the work and worked really hard at it. And that was her main contribution and participation in the community. If you had a particular area of the community that you worked hard in, you sort of end up identifying with that. Like you may have identified with nut butters. Some people identified like I did with the kitchen. And so just basically telling someone that's their branch, their aspect of living in the community, that their part of the community is done, thanks, goodbye, find something else to do, seemed kind of rough to me. And that wasn't exactly the way it was really going, but it felt that way. The lady who was in charge of the cow herd, she felt that way too. And so when we had the community meeting, I tried to ensure that the human side of these major community decisions was being dealt with too. I actually felt that at the time it was probably a good idea to give up the cow herd, but a lot of people thought that was an important part of being a rural community and the attempt to be self-sustaining. And so there was a lot of controversy over the whole thing and the labor shortage. How do you balance it all out? So the vote was to get rid of the cows. And I just felt bad about the way it was handled. And I thought it was a symptom of the way much of the major community planning was being done and the way many people were communicating and thinking about running the community, the human side of it, the values part of things. For instance, when I got there, we were buying a lot from Walmart. And I'm thinking, that's insane. We're out here in this intentional community with the values we supposedly have. There's lots of small town businesses in Gainesville and West Plains and what was it, in Arkansas nearby?
Mountain Home.
Mountain Home. Lots of small businesses that are struggling. Local folks that we should support. We should be buying from them. So what if we save a few cents here and there? So when I became kitchen manager, I implemented that. I stopped no more buying from Walmart, any place else. And I tried to convince other people about that, but in other branches, but I'm not sure how much influence I had. But I started buying local.
Well, that's now a rule actually that
What?
no labor area at Eastwind can buy from Walmart.
Really?
That's actually written into the legislation now. People's personal allowances, they can buy things at Walmart, but no labor area can spend money at Walmart.
I am glad to hear that. At the time, that wasn't the case. People just weren't thinking about it. And I wasn't against Walmart. What I was against was not supporting local businesses. We're not just an intentional community. We're not just a community isolated by ourselves. We're a part of a larger community. That's my thought at the time. And we need to think about that. And the word community should not disappear once we get outside the borders of Eastwind, was my feeling. That was an example of the kind of thinking that I felt was going on and that contributed to the way things were handled with dealing with the cow herd. And so we got rid of the cows. So that was somewhat traumatic for the community. The meeting was kind of traumatic for the community. It turned out that this was very interesting. This is a real learning experience. In these meetings, community meetings, you're there with all the folks you live with, your friends, your enemies, at least for the folks who showed up to a meeting. For these kinds of controversial meetings, a lot of people would show up, the great majority of the community, like the meeting about the cow herd. It turns out, I learned from this, that people felt a lot of social pressure as to how they voted at these meetings. Because someone I talked to later about a vote, a long-term member, told me later, they really, on some other vote, they really didn't agree with that vote, but they voted with the majority. And I said, well, why didn't you vote the way you felt? Oh, well, I didn't want to be one of the, outsiders or that was looked on as causing trouble, so I went along with everybody. And I said, oh my God, this is a long-term member. So I read through the community rules, which hardly anybody ever did apparently. And it turns out if anyone asks for a secret ballot at a community meeting, a secret ballot is required. In any community meeting I had been to before, all the ballots were just no secret ballots, all in the open. So for the cow herd meeting, I said, I would like a secret ballot for this meeting. People looked at me as if, you know, what is this authoritarian right winger come in here with secret ballot stuff? And most people didn't feel that way, but some did. The truth is, it was written into the community bylaws. And for the reason that there is social pressure when you're there to vote with whatever way people thought the winds were blowing. So you didn't feel like a troublemaker in the community, because you have to live with these people and see them every day, get into arguments, whatever. So I requested a secret ballot, just so people could vote the way they really felt. People got up in their arms about that, but it was required. So we did. And it was still voting against keeping the cows. And I voted against keeping the cows too, but I felt like people should be allowed to vote the way they really felt and feel like they could. And later on after the vote, there was a guy in the community who was a really big, rough-looking guy. I didn't know him that well. He looked really rough. Like you wouldn't want to get into any kind of difficulty with him or with me. He came up to me later and thanked me for requesting the secret ballot. He felt the same way as everybody else, like he'd be pressured to vote a certain way. That was a real lesson. I was just amazed at how much of social pressure people feel about those kinds of things. So that was what happened with the getting rid of the cows. It was a necessary evil to do that at the time. Getting rid of the cows was traumatic also, because I had to come and cart them all off to the butcher. Those cows knew what was going on. We had a heck of a time getting rounded up into the truck. Sure.
I do ask everyone this, and you had already talked about this a little bit, but alcohol consumption was not an issue while you were there that you saw. There were no meetings surrounding someone's drunken behavior while you were there.
No.
Okay.
I didn't see I saw some drunken behavior, but not a lot. It wasn't prevalent in the community that, where I could see it very often. People were high, but on alcohol or whatever they were smoking, but it didn't create big issues most of the time. Keep in mind, we were on $10 a month. You can't go and buy a case of beer on a regular basis with that kind of money.
What stands out as the thing you liked best about living there?
People I met there were really phenomenal people. And a few people that I would have been happy to, live around the rest of my life. Some really fine human beings. And the chance to meet and spend time with and live for a while with some of those people was really phenomenal. And I still miss some of them. And another thing was just the adventure of it. It was, I think a lot of people probably, ex-Eastwinders, view it as quite an adventure. If you live there a long time, you don't want to think of your home as an adventure, but it is, whether it's short or long term. It's something very different and unique. And the chance to do it and learn from it in whatever way you learn from it is very valuable. I learned a lot about myself and trying to be a better person. I had a long way to go after I left, but I still made progress, I think. And a lot of what I learned really was valuable in working with teams in the work that I eventually did. Any kind of business, but especially in the IT world that I ended up working in.
Why did you leave?
There was a combination of factors. I think in my mind, I hadn't really been prepared to live there the rest of my life. Another big issue was the gender ratio, which just you can see in the statistical graphs I sent, got way out of hand. By the time I left, it was it was 2 to 1 male to female by the time I left, which is ridiculous. I was very uncomfortable with what I felt was the lack of focus on humaneness and values in community decisions, lack of consideration of that. And I know other folks talked about that, but it bothered me. Of course, I blame myself a lot for not being able to verbalize that and talk about it and influence people in the way I would have liked to change that.
To be more considerate of each other.
To influence others to be more aware of and considerate of others, especially as a community in dealing with larger community issues and also one-on-one. I appreciated or accepted the fact that it's can be very negative and intense because it's human nature. You take a large group of people, you confine them to a small area, basically a little heated cauldron of intense human interaction. And there's going to be difficult stuff that comes up. There's going to be little explosions, large explosions, people getting upset, people fighting, arguing, deciding that stuff is important that might not normally be important, get attached to things that they might not normally get attached to. Just like you were saying, after a long time in a community, so you find yourself more and more over time, as you think of it as your long-term home, getting attached to things or attached to ways of doing things. And to give that up and being able to be in the community for a long time takes some interpersonal skills or coaching of yourself that many people can't do. An old story about the difference between heaven and hell from medieval times. A group of 10 or 15 folks from the old days and medieval times sitting around a heavily food-laden wooden table, piles of turkeys and bread and pigs with the apple in the mouth and vegetables covering the table. The people standing around all are standing there with 10-foot long spoons and forks, screaming in suffering pain. This is hell, because they can't eat and reach the food and feed themselves with the 10 feet long spoons and forks. And heaven is the same people with the same spoons and forks, 10-foot long wooden spoons, who cannot take them from their hands, feeding each other. And to me, that was a good sort of allegory for the way things were at Eastwind. I felt like constantly shaking people up, saying, look around and see where you're at, this beautiful land, us living together in relative luxury compared to most of the world. Think about where we are. Why are we getting so worked up about all these, in the big picture, little issues and interpersonal confrontations? Why all this negativity? Let's stop that and think about what we're doing here. I felt that way at times, but of course, most of the time I got caught up in things too. But it really bothered me that I felt like we were just making this a hell instead of to heaven that it could more easily be.